Yes, everyone, you know what time it is. It's your boy Jack and Dave here, returning back for the podcast after a little bit of a break, but the podcast keeps rolling. We've gone for almost, I think, like 12 or 13 weeks in a row now, keeping consistent on it. It is just Dave and I here, mostly because I think Dave and I actually haven't really chatted with each other just one-on-one in a while. So we figured we'd just sort of, have our own little discussion here, have our own little room. Dave, what are your thoughts maybe ahead of today, and how are you keeping, my friend?
Yeah, I'm keeping well, Jack. All refreshed now after our little break, which is good. Yeah, everyone needs one from time to time, my man. But yeah, look, I'm excited, Jack. I'm excited to get going again under Ange Postecoglou. You know, it's given me a bit of a rejuvenation. Don't get me wrong. We still have a long way to go in the transfer market, you know, to help this guy out so that we can implement what we hired him for. And just hopefully that we can get moving on it very, very quickly. Although, while we were away, delighted to see the signing of Dejan Kulusevski.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking forward to some content that we get to put out there with Kulusevski for sure. And also just quickly on him, since you've already decided to give me a perfect opportunity for a tangent here, I feel like Kulusevski, it has been a really interesting debate about him, about like he's only produced the best for a short period of time. We've seen him produce what is less acceptable for a longer period of time. And I could see why Spurs fans are a bit conflicted because you're getting kind of two sides of the coin of Kulusevski. We've seen kind of his worst version of himself, but we've also seen his best version of himself. And the worst version of himself has lasted a bit longer. I just think that a guy of his age and a guy of his talent, and also the fact that he does seem very unique compared to a lot of players sort of in his position. Majority of wingers nowadays do feel like they're sort of as brilliant and as amazing as like a Matoma is. I love Matoma, but I feel like there are a lot of wingers that are sort of more similar to him nowadays. Very quick, very good at taking it past their man, creating for others by using that agility, by using that extra burst of pace and everything. And Kulusevski's never been blessed with those sort of things. He's had to find other ways to sort of take it past his man by using strength, intelligence, sort of that also the way he uses his hips sometimes to sort of roll off players. It's almost like a striker. I actually think the way that he does it. And also even when we first, I'm pretty sure, got aware of Kulusevski, if you were following Sweden back in the day, he was actually playing up top or on the left, if I'm not mistaken, next to the likes of like an Alexander Isak. And it actually was proving to be very effective. And I think that was even the player that we were really excited about when we first got Kulusevski, because a lot of people saw him, right, playing for Sweden alongside Isak. And they were like, wow, these guys are really good. They're going to be the future for Sweden for sure. And that's where I am excited about Kulusevski, is I think he's not your traditional winger. Like, he's sort of a bit of everything. Like, he has a bit of that striker about him because he has the strength. He has no problem with his back to goal. I mean, Dave, the way he just sort of muscles people all the time, they'll like bring him to ground, they're trying to like grab every part of him, and he's able to muscle them off. And especially for like a 21, 22-year-old with the strength that he has at 21 and 22, he's only going to get stronger by like the time he gets like to Harry Kane's age and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like, I know this is a random tangent here, but Kulusevski, the reason why I've always loved him, the reason why I always think he's a really special player is because he's just a bit more unique than maybe, or not even unique is the right word, just sort of atypical winger. He's not your most typical common winger. He has other elements of his game that you don't often find in players who play in his position. And like I just said too, I think there's a lot of confidence that he can actually play potentially up top at some stage in his career, or play behind the striker as well, because that's even his favorite position in the first place, is playing behind the striker. But for me, 30 million euros paid over what, like some amount of time as well. I think, 6 years. It's also a contract till 2028. That suggests that Spurs have a lot of confidence in him if they're going to be extending the contract for that long as well. He's going to be with us for a while, and they definitely see him as the future. I mentioned in the past too, like Sonny, Kane, we want them as long as we can have them, but you do have to think about who's going to be taking the reins off of these guys in the near future. And Kulusevski is probably one of the more likely candidates to be able to take up and step up to that sort of role. No one can ever replace them, but you need someone to try. And Kulusevski, I think, would be a worthy guy to do it. What do you think, Dave? 30 million, 2028 contract. I'm kind of over the moon about it, but what do you make of the controversy over it? Or what do you just make of it in general?
Look, first of all, I'd say Daniel Levy's absolutely buzzing. He won the negotiations again. We know how much he loves to win. He has to win. It's the same is panning out with the David Raya deal right now. No shock there. Got 5 million off the asking price. Look, Jack, for me, I don't really understand the arguments around Kulusevski, and I've made no secret about this. I don't understand some of the arguments around some of the players that we're seeing. I get last year, in hindsight, it was an absolute shit show. And realistically, the only one that could come out of that season with his head anywhere near held high is Harry Kane. Apart from that, everybody else was absolutely abysmal. Maybe Betancourt, apart from his injury as well. Maybe he's the only other one. Apart from that, everyone else was shit.
Because who finished with a strong season? You're right. Who had a strong season? Like, who finished on a high? Very few people finished on a high.
No one had a strong season. But, Jack, within that shit, there's more shit that's cost us games than hasn't. So the likes of, and this is where I say to Spurs fans, we've got to be smart. You can't keep throwing everyone into this category. When you've got players that have been here longer than others, that have been holding this club back, when you're bringing in new players and putting beside them, we're hoping that all of a sudden that new player drags that old player up to standard. And it's not the case. You're asking a player to drag a player or help improve them and bring them up to a standard playing beside them that they've never shown in a Spurs jersey before. And ultimately, like I said at the start of last season, not buying centre-backs and not clearing out the deadwood was going to come back to haunt us, and it did. But they're the players that we should be focusing on and getting out the door before you even enter discussions on a Romero, a Kulusevski, people like that. You got to get others out the door first, ones that are glaringly obvious that held this club back a hell of a lot last year. So we've got to be smart in these conversations that we're having, that we're actually having them on the right people and not creating nuanced topics just to be a bit different on these sort of players either. You know, players that have been brought in here that we know are good. Because the reality is, you know, the likes of Dyer, Sanchez, people like that, you've seen 6 months, if even, that's generous, at the back end of the first season under Conte, right? Correct. But you've never seen it before. Whereas with other players, we've seen how good they can be before. And with Dejan Kulusevski, Jack, he's been used as a battering ram most of the season. Pick up the ball at near the end line and run it up the pitch for us, just to get us up the pitch. But also, no one speaks about this. He had Doherty to link up with for the majority of the first half of the season. Then Emerson, then Pedro Porro.
Yeah, who had
so that link up down that side, you've had 3 different right wing backs. You know, so there's never been that consistency, but also the injury. Look how many players are coming out saying, I played through injury last season. Sonny, how do you know Kulu hasn't been the same, where he was brought back early? And you know, if you're brought back early and you're still not right, it holds your game back. There's certain movements you go to do that you won't do when you know, and it's in your mind that you're still carrying an injury because you're constantly trying to protect it. So it takes away from your game. You got to remember, this is a guy that was posting numbers better than Saka over half a season last season than what Saka did over a full, or the season before over what Saka did that season as well. And for me, when I look at it, someone like Dejan Kulusevski for 30 million is an absolute daylight robbery, in my opinion, because this guy is going to go on to be worth 70, 80 million. The guy's only 23 years of age. You've had Steven Bergwijn, Lucas Moura, and others try to come in and link up with Kane and Son, and they just could not do it whatsoever. Kulusevski has come in and shown that he just slots in like a glove, hand into a glove, just fits into that system, starts assisting, creating, and everything else. And that's what you want at Tottenham. And I have no doubt in my mind you're going to see the player that we've seen in Conte's first season, next season under Ange Postecoglou. Plus, I think you're going to see an even better player because he's going to be up in the danger areas like Kane and Son even more than what he has been under the Conte system. So for me, I think it was a no-brainer. I think we've just got to be smart about going, look, we know he's a player. Okay, last season, everyone was shit, but we know
there's a player in there.
Let's keep him around. We know these players are shit and not players, not technical. Get them gone. So for me, I never really understood the debate around Kulusevski. It's obvious there's a player there. It's obvious he's going to produce. It's obvious that last season everyone was shit, so it affects absolutely everyone. It has a knock-on effect all around the team, bar Harry Kane, because he's actually world class. And it's just what it is. So for me, I'm delighted we got the Kulusevski deal over the line. I didn't like seeing reports before that where it was like, oh, the Spurs aren't sure. They're trying to, you know, this, that, and the other. Because for me, it's a no-brainer. You know, we've had players here before, even the likes of Lamela and stuff like that, never really been able to fit in with Kane and Son. But Kulu has done it seamlessly. So for me, on that, it's an absolute no-brainer.
That was the part that I was going to mention that you're absolutely spot on about, is that even if you were to be skeptical of the Kulusevski transfer, you have to look at the list of players that weren't able to even do what he has done alongside Kane and Son. Lucas Moura never really hit the heights. You look at Lamella, like you just said there, even though we love Brian Hill Messi, he's never really hit the heights that he needed to either to be that sort of extra man. Then you also look at Steven Bergwijn, who's a really good example because he was actually brought in for a lot of money to be that extra guy, to be that extra threat for Kane and for Sonny. And Kulusevski, as much as people might have their doubts if they are skeptical, I think you got to give him that sort of credit for the fact that he's actually done probably more in a Spurs kit alongside Kane and Son and being that extra threat that we always needed, because we were so predictable in the past that everybody knew the two most likely scorers for Spurs is going to be Kane and Sonny. If you can take them out of the game, you pretty much just stop Spurs. And we needed somebody to be that extra threat. That was actually somebody you had to take seriously. Not many people really took Steven Bergwijn that seriously. Not many people took Lamella that seriously. Brian Hill, like I said, we love him, but never really produced the goods in that sort of sense either. And Lucas Moura too. So, and a few others I'm probably even missing out. Jack Clark, I actually just thought of. Jack Clark now, he was brought in as an extra winger, and maybe he wasn't brought in for the here and now, but still we ended up selling him on later, and he never really filled the role that we envisioned for him. So you think like a guy like Kulusevski, like, yes, there could be some concerns about this most recent season, but actually in the short time that he's been here, he's actually, in my opinion, at least done more than almost all of the other wingers that we have brought in the past. Right. And so I think
Also,
Kulusevski is clearly just somebody that's produced more than the others. Absolutely right.
but also, Jack, when we talk about Kulusevski, right, we don't talk like we're not saying, oh, the close control isn't there, the hold up play isn't there, this, that, and the other. People question, okay, well, the end product wasn't there like it was the season before. But that'll come back. You were playing in a Spurs team that was just shit beyond belief, and you had players that weren't making runs off the ball like they were the season before. Players getting into the box and flooding it like they were the season before, this, that, and the other. So all has a knock-on effect to his end product. Also, that injury, that hamstring injury, it was clear to see that he wasn't right coming back. We all seen it, that he didn't look right. That also has a knock-on effect with his end product, because he's not swinging his leg at the ball the way he used to. This, that, and the other. It's not as comfortable. So for me, it's all about, just get him into the preseason, get him going again. Next season, that end product will be there. He'll be sharp, he'll be ready, and that's where you see the best Kulu. It's not like we've spent money on a Steven Bergwijn where it's taking 4 touches to get the ball under control. He's dribbling a player and he's knocking it 20 yards ahead of him, rather than just having the class to keep it at his feet, shift the ball a little and skin him. You're talking about a player that is all around a tidy player, and it's just getting back to getting him to produce them assists and goals. That's it.
I love that. I love that. I guess since we're already talking about like the prices of players and like, what is a player worth? Is it worth that type of coin? There's, we're going to talk about the academy later and some of the younger talent, but maybe I might skip a topic here and then get back to that topic I just mentioned a little later. Might as well just talk about the other bit of news here, because Kulusevski, of course, has been, I guess, officially signed as a Spurs player for until 2028. A lot of confidence in him. But maybe Spurs are losing confidence in David Raya, because supposedly Brentford, they're not budging at all on this 40 million pounds. And Spurs don't seem to be willing to pay as much as 40 million pounds for him, considering the fact that he has 1 year left. But I'm also thinking, too, David Raya, if he were to go to Spurs, if I'm not mistaken, would be the 4th or 5th most expensive keeper of all time. He would be around the same price that Ederson was brought into Man City from the likes of Benfica. Ederson, I don't even think is actually the best goalkeeper in the world, but I do think he's a better goalkeeper than David Raya is.
Yeah.
And so, is he really worth 4th or 5th most expensive keeper in the world? I don't think he is in that list. I think Brentford, like Spurs do, they're asking a lot for a player that they value very highly. We do the same with Kane. We do the same with Sonny. It is kind of fair that they can be stubborn, because we're stubborn too. I just think it's not that hypocritical, though, for Levy to feel like it's actually too much, because even though he does the same thing to other clubs, David Raya is too expensive a goalkeeper, in my opinion. I actually find Spurs walking away from this deal not all that problematic, not all that controversial. I can actually see it being potentially a good decision, actually, because I don't know how much our budget really is. I'm going to maybe throw around 100 million at it, because that's usually what we spend close to in and around each and every summer. So if we're spending nearly half our budget on a goalkeeper that won't even be here longer than 5 years, I do feel like that might be too expensive of a goalkeeper to bring in here. I'd rather bring in a Mike Maignan. I'd rather bring in a Georgi Mamardashvili from the likes of a Valencia. I'd rather bring in a Gavin Bazunu. I'm not saying I'd pay 40 million for a Gavin Bazunu, but I do feel like he would actually get you probably more, long-term sort of future, long-term sort of growth and everything. I think he's easily, like we mentioned in the past, one of the most talented keepers of his age group. Whereas a David Raya is going to be 28, if I'm not mistaken, by September next year. How much longer does he actually have at the top level? I know goalkeepers, it's a very different age range, but still, like, I think he's going to probably start losing a bit of that, extra, maybe burst of, a spring or, that extra bit of athleticism and everything by the time he reaches 33, 34. That's when Hugo started to hit his decline. And Hugo was a very athletic keeper. I described him in the past, even though I've been very harsh towards him always. I think he's like a cat, Hugo. He can make those ridiculous saves out of nowhere, like jumping after a tennis ball like a cat would. But David Raya, I wouldn't exactly describe that type of keeper. I think he's more technical, a bit more kind of traditional. Like, he makes very calm and composed saves, very good at sort of just parrying it to the right areas. But like I said, you start to lose sort of that athleticism by a certain age. So you start to get down a little slower. You start having to maybe guess where players are going to start finishing more than just reacting and things like that. So I'm feeling like David Raya, as good of a keeper as he is right now, I don't think he's one of the best keepers in the world. I don't even think he's one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League at this moment in time. So I feel like if he were to go to Spurs for what would be nearly half our transfer budget, and also being, again, one of the most expensive keepers of all time, don't think it's actually worth that 40 million pounds. I'd rather we go after the Mike Maignans, the Mamardashvilis, and the Gavin Bazunus. And I think goalkeeper right now is actually a quite saturated position. It feels like there are a lot of guys that are just all sort of coming up right now. You can't really say, who is the best goalkeeper in the world right now. It's actually hard for me to even answer that question, who the best goalkeeper in the world right now is. I feel like it is sort of maybe the next up and coming generation that's going to be the next best goalkeeper in the world, like the Mike Maignans and players like that. So I personally would be happy if we actually went for a bit of a younger keeper, Dave, and I'm not all that fussed about Spurs walking away from this deal. Do you agree, disagree? What do you think?
Look, first of all, I mean, it's important. I highlighted that this was going to happen. Tottenham and Brentford have history with this before over Ollie Watkins. So I'm not surprised to see it still rumbling on, Jack.
Yeah.
We were in the midst of putting a scout report together and everything on and thinking it was going to happen. And, we decided, look, it's, with Daniel leaving the negotiations, it's not going to happen. So we just wait till we're back anyway. But look, Jack, I expect this one to rumble on a lot longer, if you want me to be brutally honest, when it comes to someone like David Raya, because, look, you got to remember, this guy's agent has come out and said he's leaving next season regardless. Brentford already have his replacement signed. And, if you're Brentford, you're looking at it, well, Tottenham need a new number one. So we'll just charge what we want or we'll make it, we'll protract it for as long as we want eventually. And I think also, a lot of people are worried about United coming in, Inter Milan coming in. I don't buy it one bit. If United wanted him, he'd be at United already. And when you look at him, right, yes, his distribution from the ball in hand to sort of drop kicking it is A1. But actually on the ball, playing around the back,
a little sketchy.
Is he actually better than David De Gea at Man United? I would say no. And that's why I think United have not come in from on that basis. And I think that's...
Do you think they did a bit of due diligence? They did a bit of research and compared him to the likes of a David De Gea and looked at maybe some of the footage. Maybe they looked back at certain moments and thought, like you just said, he brings counterattacks and he springs counterattacks better than any other goalkeeper, David Raya. But if you're actually giving him a back pass, that's hit with a bit of zip, and you need him to make a good touch, and you need him to be able to pick somebody out. He's not always been that guy.
No,
is what you're saying.
Someone like United needs someone like Onana, who's very confident on the ball. He's come to the reason why he's so good on the ball is because he's come through that Ajax system, which Ten Hag has come through as well as a manager, and that's the way he wants his keepers to be. David Raya is not going to be that goalkeeper, and that's why I think United are looking elsewhere, because realistically, if United want him, he would be at United right now. So I think all them reports about Inter Milan being interested, United being interested, is driven by Brentford to try and get Spurs to knee-jerk, go in, there's your 40 million, let's get it done. But on Spurs' end, I believe they also think the same as me. If United wanted him, he'd be a United player. So I don't think Spurs want to pay the 40 million knowing that he's going to leave. And I think they also realise that, look, Maybe United aren't interested. Maybe Inter Milan aren't really interested. So the fact that they've already got their number one in
If they're
place,
the only one going for him.
we're going to sit there and we're going to negotiate. So what you have now is a standoff between both clubs, because Tottenham look at it one way, Brentford look at it the other, and they're both driving media reports. Like Tottenham put out that stuff today about Marmadashvili. I don't buy it one bit. I do not buy it one bit. It's put out there to try and get Brentford to knee-jerk on the other side and go, okay, 30 million, give it to us. So for me, this is what you're seeing, and I think this will go on longer and longer and longer, because you've got two chairmans, basically. You've got one who has pride in his model and knows the players' worth and is not going to budge from it, because he's going to want the maximum possible to help push Brentford into one of them European spots next year. And then on the other end, you've got another one who's notoriously known for not being taken advantage of in the transfer market. And he's going to want to live up to that reputation. Yeah. So this one could mumble on towards maybe July, just before pre-season. I think then Spurs might go, right, okay, there's the 40 million. But is he worth 40 million? Jack, for me, it's one you weigh up, right? If you're in Tottenham's situation now, you know you need a centre-back. You know you need, you need two centre-backs, 3 preferably. You know you need a goalkeeper.
Yep.
You need 1 or 2 midfielders as well to help Ange Postecoglou's system. Potentially a couple of wing-backs as well. So you've got a lot of positions to fill this summer. So when it comes to David Raya, I can understand why Tottenham want to negotiate, because they've got a lot of other business to do. Mm-hmm. They've got a certain budget and they want to live within that means. But where Spurs fans get frustrated, Jack, is we've seen this decline happen. The fact that, okay, we're in Champions League last year, but realistically, Conte said it himself, it was a miracle. We were lucky to get there. So you take that out of the equation, you've gone from Europa Conference League football to no European football. And it's not good enough, and the club's fallen backwards. So at some stage, in order to get the players in you need, you've got to act fast and you've got to get that player in. Like, for instance, I'll save that for the next segment. But do
you think David Raya, right, is like, if what you're saying is Spurs are desperate, they need to bring in a ton of players this summer and they can't wait too long, right, is what you're saying. Like, they can't just expect to negotiate this forever, because Ange Postecoglou needs to work with his team. He's working on a rebuild right now. He can't just have his goalkeeper show up at the doorstep, 2 weeks before the season begins. He needs his goalkeeper there for the preseason. And so I feel like I agree with you where it's like, I have no problem with Spurs playing hardball. I have no problem with, Daniel Levy going for a bit of this Logan Roy succession, type of thing where he's like, I'm willing to walk away and sort of toss everything and, be, that type of guy, that type of negotiator, right? He does always come across that way. It's just sort of, you're right. The fact that you can't also negotiate forever. Like, you do need to eventually bring in a goalkeeper of some kind. And if David Raya is your number one choice, I don't think he really should be our number one choice. I don't hate David Raya. I actually think he's a fine goalkeeper. I just don't think he's worth the 40 million. So if he's our number one choice, if we think he's the best one, maybe, you do just sort of pay the price. And turns out maybe it's like a Ramsdale sort of signing where it might have looked really expensive at first, but then actually turned out to be really brilliant for you guys. Let's just hope that's the case. But there is that thing where, you said it's a trade-off between, like, you don't want to be taken advantage of. You don't want to be paying too much than you already are. But also you need to bring in players because we need a new rebuild. We need a whole new team for Postecoglou to work with. We can't have him show up to the first days of training and there hasn't been a new signing and he's still working with Sanchez, Dyer, all these guys, Hugo as well. Like, that wouldn't help him whatsoever. He needs to have new signings in by the time he gets to that preseason. You're spot on.
Spot on. He has to have them in, Jack. We can't go into a preseason with a new manager and not have the players that he needs in the door, that he's identified, to get in as soon as possible to help him transition his system. You've got to have that in before preseason so that everyone knows exactly what it's like, especially with our Premier League fixture list, right? A lot of away games first. It's even more important to get these players in the door so they understand the system as quick as possible and not being dropped in a couple of days before the season starts, trying to get to grips with the system, but also the fitness levels for the intensity. Mm-hmm. So, you have to get them in nice and early. And when it comes to David Raya, Jack, like, the reason why I think it's going on so long is because I think the clubs are at complete different ends. Yeah. It's not like they're 10 million away. If it's 10 million away, you can understand a couple of negotiations. Usually, you'll meet somewhere in the middle. But I believe Spurs are probably at 20 million and Brentford are at 40 million. And that's why it's going on so long. That's why you're seeing, Spurs are going to turn their attention here, or Brentford are saying, or United and Inter Milan are interested, this, that, and the other, because they're so far apart. If they were closer in the valuation, this one would have got done quick enough. And like, I'm at the point now where we know we need the goalkeeper, right? There's only a certain amount of goalkeepers that are good enough to be at Tottenham Hotspur that are on the market. And you don't want to miss out. So on this one, you've saved money on Kulusevski. You might save money somewhere else along the summer window. So this one, just pay the money. Just pay the money and get it in. And this is what I'm saying. You've got to weigh it up and be smart. You know, you've saved in the other areas. So this one, just pay the money and look to save elsewhere, in my opinion.
Maybe I'm coming at this with a bit of bias then. Maybe I'm having a bit of bias with the fact that David Raya isn't my first choice for goalkeeper. But
He's not mine either.
But if he's Spurs' first choice, if he's Tottenham's first choice, like you said, pay the 40 million then. If he's your first choice, pay the 40 million. If you're not really sure about him being your first choice, I think you do go down the route of like, you know what, we're willing to walk away from this because we don't even know if he's our favorite option at this moment in time. We are fine with actually going to alternatives. But if he is the clear standout for you in your due diligence and your research and everything, if he's the clear standout, you just pay the money. And it's also such an important position because it is goalkeeper. It's not like it's a backup left back or some sort of weird unorthodox position that you're buying a player for. You're buying a standard position that is a crucial position that guarantees you titles or guarantees you trophies, because a goalkeeper can make a save in the most crucial moments of games that win you a match, that win you a trophy, that you even saw with the likes of Emiliano Martinez for Argentina, some of those saves that he made to get them to that penalty shootout. France should have never allowed them to get to that penalty shootout, but they did because of the goalkeeping from Martinez. And if we can have a guy like that can do that for us, absolutely worth the 40 million. And I'm not saying David Raya won't be that man. It's just me, my own bias towards who I might prefer, which would be more like a Mamardashvili, a Gavin Bazunu, a Mike Mannion, mostly because I think they're a lot younger. So I feel like they have even more to grow. And I think they're almost just as good as David Raya right now. Makes me feel like we could actually save a bit of money, or we could actually just get better bang for our buck, type of thing. Then again, like you just said, if he's the first choice, don't fucking, don't mess around. Don't mess around if he's the first choice.
But also, Jack, we're going into a new era. Learn lessons from the past. You got a lot to do. Just go around and act like some big boys. Like, just, okay, 40 million, no problem. There you are. Let's bring him in. Let's move on. Get the next target. Boom. Actually show that you have some intent, some intentions to really sort this out. Like, a lot of fans are sitting here looking at West Ham, looking at Arsenal, Chelsea, and a lot of the outs and ins and negotiations going on. And ours are just protracted. And what you're seeing is you're seeing clubs acting like big boys in big boy places. You're seeing Tottenham act like mini-men in mini-men places in the Premier League, and it's reflecting in the standards in the Premier League. At some point, when you fucked up for as long as you have, when you've made as bad decisions for as long as you have, sometimes the best solution is just to go, okay, bam, 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 bam. Let's go. Let's get back to where we once were, and let's build from it from there. And that's where many Spurs fans are at right now. Just give us what we need. Act like some big boys. How much? No problem. Let's go. Yeah. Oh, actually, do you know what? We'll give you £1, just a pound over, just to be nice. Just act like big boys. Get it done one after another, especially because we're in a position now. You've got Harry Kane, potentially leaving next season and stuff like that. You've got to get a lot of the other pieces in place before he goes. So just bam, 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 bam. Because not only are you trying to give Postecoglou the best chance, you're also trying to keep Harry Kane around and persuade him to sign a new contract, and that Tottenham are going in the right direction. So, and also try and get some fans back on side. They've lost the fan base completely last season. And if you want to do that, you have to change your mentality up in the boardroom. I get negotiations in years gone by and stuff like that. But where we're at right now, and with some of the stuff coming out that we're the third richest or the third highest generating sports club in terms of revenue and stuff like that, it just irks fans even more. So if you really want to change the culture of this football club, if you really want to send it in the right direction, go into the market and act like the big dogs.
I think everybody's going to agree with you. And I think everybody's probably going to disagree with me with what I'm about to bring up here, because I actually feel like Spurs, like you said there, if he's the number one, absolutely go for him. But I find it that we often sort of forget that it's okay to be picky sometimes. Like, it is okay if you don't know who your main guy is. If you feel like they're all sort of comparable, if you feel like they're all like, let's say, for example, let's talk about a different position, like center back. Like, let's say we just don't really know who our number one to partner Romero is for center back. And we probably have a certain price that we're willing to pay for each of these guys. You just go into each of these negotiations and see what you can get out of it. You might realize that a certain center back could actually save you a lot more money, might be just as talented, it might have just as high of a ceiling, and sort of be sharing all the same attributes. And so it isn't all that crazy when a club who doesn't have, I mean, a small size nation's GDP to spend every single summer, you are going to need to try to save a buck here and there. You are going to need to try to maybe spend a bit more on a certain position and then try to save money on another position that you feel like might be either less important, or it could also be that the market is actually saturated in certain positions. I believe that's the case, where certain positions are so saturated with talent that it's actually then lowers the price of a lot of the guys because you just have so many ones to pick from. I personally believe that's the case with goalkeeper right now. Like, I just can't really name who the best goalkeepers in the world right now are. I think most of the best goalkeepers in the world are all sort of at a younger age. So it sort of makes you feel like you can sort of be a bit picky about it. But then again, most Spurs fans are tired of being picky. We are known as the most picky club. We're known as a team that always goes into strategy or goes into negotiations with very like firm principles, very firm strategies that people get really annoyed with. We're described as being very stubborn. We're described as being, maybe very budget oriented. And I could see why that just gets exhausting, because it's led to our downfall. It's led to us not bringing in the center backs, like you said. It's led to us maybe not investing in certain positions when we should have, or either investing enough money when we should have. It's also led to guys like Jack Grealish, of course, not being brought through the door, other players that we could have brought through the door that would have been supreme talents to be able to transform our squad. We decided, you know what, we're not willing to go 2 million above. We're going to be really stubborn. And then we missed out on the opportunity. And like people would say, what is that 2 million really worth to Spurs? I agree with them. It's not worth much of anything. I just feel like, though, with such a heavy window where you need to bring in, like you said, at least two center backs, a goalkeeper, maybe a left back, right back, potentially, if one of them goes out the door as well, two midfielders, probably another creative midfielder or an attacker or something. Like, you're bringing in 6 or 7 guys potentially this summer window. You can't sort of spend 40 million on each and every one of those positions. You're going to need to sort of save money here and there. Like, we are never going to be, until we get taken over by a different owner, we're never going to be the Saudi Arabian owned clubs or the Qatari owned clubs, where even if you feel like you're spending too much, you have that extra reserves in the bank, just throw money at it. Spurs have never been the team that can just throw money at clubs. I agree with you. We should act like much bigger. We should be spending much bigger, and we should be acting like bigger dogs in the sort of negotiations and in these transfer markets. But you're also competing with teams that just sort of have blank checks, and teams that sort of can just throw money at whatever problem they have in order to fix it. And Spurs should take a bit of that out of their book. Like, they should start throwing more money at the problems that we have to fix them. But I just feel like with such a huge window ahead of us, with what is already a pretty messy rebuild, because we need positions, we need to fill in positions everywhere from the defense all the way up to the attack. I just think that Spurs are going to have to look at being picky on certain positions, or they're going to have to look at being a bit more budget oriented on certain positions, especially if our budget is going to be in around the 100 million. Plenty of people think it should be much more than that. I would love for it to be more than 100 million. But if it is going to be around 100 million, just have to accept the circumstances and realize that maybe Spurs shouldn't be spending 60 million on a Madison when that could actually go towards a center back, right? That should go towards a different sort of position. That's how I sort of see the transfer market, Dave, sometimes, is that you need to think about what budget you have. You need to think about what positions you're willing to spend more in than others. And you need to think about what sort of positions you feel like you have plenty of backup options, alternative options, and everything that can also be just as good of players.
See, the thing is, though, Jack, like, I get the budgets and all, right? But when things aren't going well, sometimes you have to take a risk and break that budget to get things back on track, then steering in the right direction. And look, I have no problem with Spurs being picky in terms of, exactly what they want in a player, this, that, and the other, and stuff like that, right? No problem with that. But I think where the frustration comes in, though, Jack, is we're too picky.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And this is
Notorious
the
for
problem.
being picky.
we're not proactive. Like you look at Chelsea, right? For instance, Kante, Kovacic, Havertz, Ziyech, Mendy, Koulibaly, all out the door. Every single one of them out of the door, right? And now they're also working on players coming in, this, that, and the other. You look at Arsenal signing Havertz, City signing Kovacic, people like that. They're already starting to get their business done. You look at Brighton before the season even ended, signing James Milner, Liverpool signing McAllister. So the reality is a lot of clubs started acting months ago. Now, I know some people will say, well, David can't act without Ange Postecoglou. Okay, they couldn't announce it until after the cup final, but you can't tell me that they waited that long not knowing that Ange Postecoglou had already signed on the dotted line and agreed to become a Spurs manager. So at that point, he does. You turn around to him, you say, okay, straight away, off the top of your head, tell me the targets you need in here and tell me the targets you want out straight away without even looking at anybody so I can get working on that. And the problem is you're seeing clubs like Brighton who've come from the Championship, also built a new stadium, training complex and everything else, acting more efficiently in the transfer market than Tottenham. Now, Brighton never used the excuse about their stadium and the high debt on the stadium and everything else holding them back. But we do at Tottenham the whole time. It's always used why we can't act here, why we can't act there. But someone like Brighton, it's never an excuse. And this is what pisses Spurs fans off. You just need to be more proactive in the market. Even if you look at it as a selling point of view, Jack. Why? Why haven't we started to get players out? Okay, if there's no interest, start ripping up contracts. If that's what you
need to get players in. You need to make spots available.
You created this mess. You have created this mess. You're the one that, not you, Jack. Sorry, not you, Jack, but the people inside the club.
I'm the one who's accepting Spurs being a bit picky. So if anything, if I'm ever going to be part of the problem, this is the one time maybe I'll say I am, just because I am sort of not defending Levy. I'm just sort of defending our strategy thus far this summer, because it does seem like this summer we are still doing a bit of the classic Daniel Levy negotiation strategies and principles that everybody gets frustrated with. And I get frustrated with them too. I just sort of think like every now and again, like it's just sort of how it is. Like you just need to be that sort of like kind of, tough negotiator. You do need to be a bit picky. You do need to sort of, be a bit of a hard guy to play with. You don't want to be a complete pushover every time. But people feel like Spurs are too often that type of team, and then that makes us miss out on targets, and it makes us miss out on the work that needs to get done. So if anything, I'm probably being more defensive of actually Spurs' strategy than usual. So I do get where you're coming from on this, Dave.
But the thing is, Jack, the problems that we're at right now are self-created. The club are the ones that put these players on 67k a week in Sanchez's case. Dyer 80k a week, Davies 85k a week, and then they go, well, we can't offload them because the wages they're on. But the club are the one that put themselves in that situation anyway. So it's sort of like at some point, if you can't sell them, you rip up the contracts, you get them gone. You give this manager a clean slate. You have to. You cannot persist next season with some of these guys. We know how it's going to end, and I don't want anyone to sit here and tell me it's going to end differently. It's not. Every manager with these guys, when they've had to form their starting lineup, have all ended up sharing the same fate. So it's important that these guys are gone. So even if you look at it in terms of a market of getting rid of players to create room for players to come in.
You got to be cutthroat there too.
You've got to be cutthroat. You've got to be more active. You've got to be more clever. Then it comes down to a question is, do these players have resale value or do they not? Now you look at Saudi Arabia. Some people say Daniel Levy asked for too much money for these players, which he probably does, let's be honest.
Yeah, no, it definitely does.
But the money out in Saudi Arabia, it's not a problem to them. Not one of them have come in for any of them players, maybe bar Hugo Lloris, who's on his way out anyway. But none of them have come in and dropped the funds on anybody else. So that tells you we have stockpiled shit that nobody wants. That's why we had to loan out so many players last year.
Spot on.
So at some point, you've got to be cutthroat on the situation of even getting players out the door. And this is Tottenham's problem. They're going to sit there, wait for 15, 20 million, and it's not going to arrive. Then come the end of the window, you're panicking, trying to push them out on loan here, there, and everywhere. Start being ruthless. Start getting rid of these guys and start bringing in guys. Be more proactive. There's clubs out there already acting, already being more proactive, looking for a big season next season. While we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs. The only deal we've got done is a player that was coming to Tottenham anyway.
Yeah.
And it's not good enough. And this is what is frustrating the living life out of fans, out of me, Jack. It's like it's boring. It's every single window under every single manager. And at some stage, it has to change. You have to stop being picky and just start being more proactive, especially when the club has gone from a Champions League club to a club that no longer plays European football.
Yeah.
At some stage, you have to start being proactive and stop being picky. Go away from your transfer model of being a negotiator looking to sell at the highest price. When you look at the state of the club it's in now, you're not going to get the highest price for the talents. Sorry, not the talents. That's the wrong word. For the chicks. You're not going to get that high price. Cut the cost. Get them out. Cut the contracts. And start bringing players in here. It's just a joke, man. And I'm fed up with it. The business model worked while we were building that stadium. While we were trying to go from a club, maybe the size of what Brighton was, to a club, the size of Liverpool and Man United and that in terms of stadium,
breaking
training
into the
complex
top 6
and everything else. But now you need to transfer. You need the transfer strategy to go with it, Jack. And we're still operating off the old model that helped us build the stadium and everything else. And it hasn't been updated, and it needs to be updated. If you want to sit up there and demand Champions League off your managers, and that's the basis you're sacking them off, well, then at some stage you've got to start acting like a Champions League club in the transfer market. I'm sick of watching players. We done it last January, Jack. We're watching players go to other clubs, and we're sitting there. How's he not coming to Tottenham? We're crying out for a player like that. It's a joke, and I'm fed up with it.
Well, Chelsea, for example, last summer I felt like they brought in 10 center backs. It looked like last summer when we needed 10 center backs. It felt like we needed more center backs than they even needed. And they brought in 3 times as many as we brought. Just to push back or maybe just add a bit of, sauce to this. Do you feel like Spurs fans would be more accepting of us being a bit picky, of us being a bit more stubborn with the negotiations? Let's say the sort of Daniel Levy transfer strategies. Would Spurs be more accepting of that if we had the track record like a Brighton, like a Brentford, like maybe even Napoli just did this most recent summer? Because Napoli, right, they brought in most of those talents for like less than 20 million. Like it was it was probably the best transfer window we've seen in a long time. Majority of the players they brought in was for practically nothing. So do you feel like if Spurs did bring in like a Kavicha, let's say 3 years ago when we were linked with him for like 5-10 million euros, if we did bring in a Kim Min-jae, and if we did bring in other players like Jack Grealish for the cheaper fee that we originally could have gotten him at the time, would Spurs fans be a bit more accepting of this kind of pickiness because they know for a fact that the recruitment department is spot on? They know for a fact that Daniel Levy isn't the one doing the football sort of, decisions. It's other guys that are making the decisions and whatnot. Let's just say if we were run more like a Brentford or a Leipzig or like a Brighton, would we be more accepting of the pickiness, do you think?
I think, look, Jack, if there was a strategy put into place and you had the proof that it was working, yes, Spurs fans would be way more accepting. But the problem is we know we don't have that. Paratici walked in here and laughed at our scouting department. It's too old. You guys are living in the 18th century. It's now the 21st century. He's had to completely gut it, this, that, and the other. So we already know that the scouting department is failing. So if that wasn't failing, Jack, you wouldn't have to sit there and have protracted negotiations with someone like Brentford over David Raya, because you already have that guy brought in. He's already sitting in your club, waiting for the first team opportunity, a bit like what Brighton do, right? They had McAllister at that club for years. They had Evan Ferguson around that club for years before they eventually made it into the first team. And that's where Tottenham need to get, Jack. And until they have that proven track record, you're going to keep seeing negotiations like this. And it surprises me because it's actually something Tottenham used to be good at. Aaron Lennon picked up from Leeds Academy along with Danny Rose. Kyle Walker picked up from Sheffield United Academy. Modric picked up from Dynamo Zagreb. You had a few players that we picked up from Ajax at the time, like Vertonghen, Ericsson, people like that. Lloris, we spotted from the French league from Nice, nice and early, got him in
Dembele from Fulham.
And him and Modric were ones with big reputations and could have really went anywhere around Europe. So my point is, it's something that we actually done well in the past that actually helped us gather the money to build that new stadium, right? Because they got them signings right. They all came in. They formed a very good team and stuff like that. But now, and even like Modric and Lennon before, they formed a good team on the Redknapp and stuff like that as well. But now, like when you're looking at it, we don't get that right. You don't have any players coming through from the youth academy. A lot of our signings that come in here, especially before the Paratici time, we're not coming in and improving the situation. Paratici signed better technical players, but again, they haven't really exactly improved the situation. So it's sort of like we have a long outstanding since that stadium's been built of a poor transfer record. And this is why fans get annoyed. We also have a long history since building the stadium of losing out on signings. For instance, Bruno Fernandes, Luis Diaz. We put in a bid early that January transfer window, and he still ended up at Liverpool. So, we just keep getting it wrong. So we don't have that track record, and that's why fans get pissed off. That's why fans get annoyed. That's why we're in for players and clubs are extorting us. You know, if you had that transfer policy right, you could sit there and you could negotiate in the transfer market because you're not looking to bring in as many as we're looking to bring in. You're only looking at a couple of positions because you already know you've got the guy that you've identified beforehand in your academy or in and around the first team, just waiting for the guy in his position to leave. And he seamlessly comes in. And until we get to that point, every Spurs fan is continuously going to be pissed off because they've got a guy in charge of negotiations, which we were told he didn't want to do. He wanted a director of football to do it. And you've got a scouting department where no one seems to be able to identify any talent. Yeah. So, it's failing miserably. And that's why Spurs fans get so annoyed about it.
I agree. I just, maybe this sounds actually not that clever, really doesn't sound that deep or anything. I just want smart recruitment more than big spending. Like, I think there's a difference between, having smart recruitment and then just spending a lot of money, because spending a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean it's the right player that you brought in or it's the right bit of recruitment. You even look at Koulibaly just this last, window. Everybody wanted Koulibaly. Everybody thought he was going to slot into the Premier League straight away. Must be honest, I think you could check some of my tweets back in the day, but I did say I was a little bit skeptical of that transfer, and it was just more due to the price tag. I was just like, is he really worth 50 million, like at that age, like considering he might not even hit the ground running or he might actually be too old for the Premier League? Turns out he was, and he is already now headed back to Saudi Arabia, not headed back, now headed to Saudi Arabia for half the price that they originally brought him in for. And it just feels like what I want Spurs to do is to be always careful. Like, I don't want us just to spend 60 million on a player just to spend 60 million. I want us to spend 60 million if we think he is the right one for that position to transform this team. If he's 60 million or if he's 6 million, I don't care, as long as it's the right smart recruitment for that position. And I probably think everybody agrees with that. It's probably not even that much of a unique point that I'm making here, but that's maybe where I am coming from on the whole pickiness thing. It's like, maybe instead of the word picky, I'm thinking also the word careful. It's about being, due diligence. It's about knowing who you want as your target. Who is the guy that you think can transform that team? If the guy that you think can transform the team is only £2 million, so be it. Bring him in for £2 million, like a Matoma was for the likes of Brighton, or like a Kavicha was for the likes of a Napoli. But if you think that the guy that can transform the team is 100 million, then pay the 100 million. It's just sort of like, I don't want us to fall into the trap maybe of a player is, has to be a certain price in order for him to transform this team. There's so many players out there that actually could cost only 10, 12 million. But as long as you did the research and as long as you did your due diligence, like other clubs do, he could be a 50 million pound player within a year. It's just sort of the difference between spending too big and then also spending carefully. And I just want Spurs to spend carefully, even if that means spending big. I just want us to spend carefully. I don't want us to turn this into a Gareth Bale type window where we're just buying a bunch of randos for, to make up 100 million worth of a transfer budget. If we don't think we need to even spend 100 million because our targets happen to be below those price tags, so be it. That's grand. But if it happens to be over 100 million because our number one targets exceed that price budget, then pay it. Absolutely right. It's just sort of, I don't know if it's a unique point I'm making, Dave, on this sort of topic, but I think it's like picky and careful. Like picky and careful, two different things.
See, the thing is, right? We've been careful every window, but we're not seeing the benefits of being strategic or careful, right? Yeah. And the thing is, the point you make, Jack, is that if you got these signings and you had them all in place, that then frees up the budget for you to go and enter the market for a world-class player. Because right now, every window, we're always looking to make our budget spread through 4, 5, 6, 7 different positions, especially over the last 4 years. And there's only so many players that you can buy at a value within that budget. And it's a knock-on effect. Whereas if we done what you said, which we've done in the past, right, by smart recruitment, picking up good players at good prices and stuff like that, then it opens up the window that then, okay, I've got 60, 70, 80 million, 100 million burning a hole in my pocket. Why don't we go for one of the best midfielders in the world? And you can do that because you're not looking at any other position. Now, you take yourself back to when Rafa van der Vaart came in here. Massive signing at the time. The reason why we're able to get that one now over the line, A, because Madrid wanted to sell anyway, but because we had a lot of the other positions in
already
place
filled
at good money. So we could go and do what it took to get someone like Van der Vaart in here.
Yeah.
And to get back to that, you have to get back to the clever recruitment. And it's that simple.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on actually about that. If I were to maybe just bring one last question to that topic right there, would you spend 60 million pounds on a James Maddison, Dave? If he's the right target for Spurs, if he's the one that they think is the creative midfield option, is it all right then to spend 60 million pounds when maybe an Alex Scott and Eze could be half the price? Is that all right?
Look, Alex Scott,
when that could be spent on a center back, like we spent 60 million once on Richarlison. As much as Richarlison was a backup striker we needed, and we needed a guy like that, that could have been spent better maybe on a center back, right? That could have been spent elsewhere. It could have been, could make more of that money. And that's what we're kind of going about. And do you feel like maybe that could be another example as we bring in James Maddison for 60 million for a creative midfield position that we do need? We need a creative midfielder, but we probably, at least you and I both believe, we need center backs and goalkeepers more than we need a creative midfielder at this moment in time. So do we feel like, is that a bad decision? Maybe is what I'm asking, to spend more on a James Maddison or something like that and spend majority of your budget on one player than it is, in the positions that you might actually need. This is kind of what I mean about being like careful and being picky and whatnot, things like that.
We shouldn't sanction any money on James Maddison if it means it's gonna affect the players you can bring in at centre back. First and foremost, centre back is the most important. So, for instance, Laporte hasn't really played a lot at City this year. Go and get him. Go and use that 60 million would get Laporte, or at least get City to accept the bid.
Absolutely.
Now, whether Laporte accepts Tottenham or not is a different story.
Yeah.
But that 60 million would open up the discussions with Laporte. Why haven't we gone and done it? Why? Why are we looking at a Cam? I've said this time and time and time again. Scoring goals at Tottenham is not a problem. Guess what? Even with Kulu not playing well last year, and Son, scoring goals at Tottenham was not a problem. Keeping them out, however, is the biggest problem. And I'm sick of talking about it.
That's where I want to spend money.
So use that money, go and get Laporte, go and get centre-backs in the door, and then you can work out at Cam. Okay, I don't have the 60 million from Maddison, but there's Pedro Gonçalves out there. We've did business with Sporting before. We know we can delay the payments for a year if we have to. Eze at Crystal Palace, highly rated. Got an England call up the other day. His value is only going to go up and up and up.
True.
So you can sort of screw your targets in that position if needed. However, where we're at right now, if they're serious, you don't screw with them at all. You go and get Laporte, you go and get the other centre backs you need, and you still find the money for James Maddison. The point is, Jack, that I'm trying to make overall, I think, is I don't care about the money or that anymore. I'm at that point, right? Football's going one way. It's going one way.
Yeah.
You either get with it or you don't. And if we want to be serious, if we want to start winning games, stop buying cheap, because you buy cheap, you buy twice. We've seen that at right wing back, at right back, whatever you want to call it. You brought in Matt Doherty, then you had to go and double down and bring in an Emerson. Okay, Emerson wasn't the finished article, so then you had to go and double down again and spend more money on that position in a Pedro Porro. And you also brought in Spence. So if you keep buying cheap, you're going to cause yourself problems. At some point, you've just got to go, okay, there's the money, get it done. Because we're at the point right now, we can either slip into the bottom half of the table or we can rise up that table. What does the chairman, what does this club want? Because let's be honest, Jack, right? Joe Lewis, he made over 800 million last year in terms of on top of the wealth he already had. So money is actually not a problem at Tottenham Hotspur. We can compete if they allowed the business model to compete, but they won't, because
they
they're
don't want to behave like the other clubs.
They're hoping, and you've heard Daniel Levy say this before, about financial fair play rules coming in, and that he's hoping that that's going to swallow up what's happening in the market currently, and that he can be the smartest guy in the room and take advantage of it then.
He wants everybody else to operate like Spurs is what it is. He wants everybody else to play like Spurs do. And the fact that what probably upsets Levy is that no one else is operating like him. They're actually doing the opposite of what he does. They're spending senselessly. They're often spending 60 million on a guy that they end up selling the following season, like a Mudryk, right? Was brought in for 100 million, even though I even rated Mudryk. Still, now you look at that, you're like, geez, what money wasted, at least for right now. And it's like Daniel Levy looks at those transfers and sort of laughs at them and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, more clubs are doing what a Chelsea are doing. More clubs are doing the big spending than they are sort of the tough, negotiation budget type spending that Daniel Levy wants to do. And that's something he has to do. He has to read the room. He has to read the situation that not every club wants to operate like how he does. And maybe he has to take more pages out of the other club's book than clubs take a page out of his book. Spot on.
But the thing is, Jack, the thing is, they're trying to be the smartest guys in the room.
Yeah.
They're trying to foresee a financial crash in football. Now, we all know at some point it's going to happen, but when? And how many seasons have you wasted giving away trophies
falling
for
down
that
the
year to come around? You know what I mean? And it's not good enough. And all you're doing is diminishing the reputation of Tottenham as a trophy-winning club the longer that goes on. At some point, you've just got to say, especially with how bad Tottenham are, okay, we have to go for it. What have we got to lose at this point? Because if the club falls further and further down the Premier League, the valuation of Tottenham that they're clinging on to right now as a Champions, or what was a Champions League club, at the 3.5 billion or whatever the value Tottenham are at, that's the valuation of Tottenham at the top end of the table. But the valuation, if we end up going down to a lower league Premier League team, it's going to diminish. So it's even in their interest, Jack, to break the transfer strategy this summer and just go for it.
Everybody, I think we're going to leave it there, though, on this podcast. And please hit that like button on the way out. Also, if maybe you did miss the bonus section, I think it was a bit of an interesting one. Dave and I did speak about who our dream signings would be, and we're not going to give them away right now. So if you do want to grab that Flat Cap membership and have a bit of a listen to who our dream signings would be this summer window, please do check that out. Just hit that big join button logo, and then you can follow the steps, and you can be part of the Harris Army and part of the Flat Cap Army. Everybody leave a comment down below as well, and maybe anything that you might have disagreed with, especially I imagine with stuff I might have said today. I was probably more defensive of sort of club strategies and sort of Daniel Levy's own strategies than usual. So everybody feel free to slate me down in the comments, or just bring up, anything that you might have thought that I could have looked at a bit differently, or maybe some examples that maybe would prove one of us wrong or even prove one of us right. Maybe gave Dave some extra evidence to prove him right or something like that. But yeah, any messages for the Harris Army before we go, Dave?
Yeah, no, look, it's good to be back. I know you guys enjoyed the video on the Youth Academy and the 5 players we think that will do well under Ange. If you haven't seen them, go back and watch them. People really enjoyed them. And then we're back from holidays, so we've got nothing else booked until August at least. So we're going to be on the screens very regularly between now and then. And hopefully you can all enjoy it, join us for the ride. Look, squad, if you do enjoy these podcasts, if you do enjoy the video ideas, the work that goes into them, and the way we present them and stuff like that, feel free to grab that channel membership. You've got the $4.99 one that opens up the fan shows that we do every single Monday night. Or you've got the $1.99 one, just the general support for the boys. And if everyone grabbed one of them, you could really help your boys out, do more and more and more, and be better and better and better. So if you do enjoy them, please grab them channel memberships.
Everybody, hit that like button on the way out. We will be seeing you. Come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.
And in the big Ange we trust. See you, everybody.